Hello students, good morning. Today we are on to the second part of the lesson on civics, that is the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. We had learned about the appointment of the Prime Minister, the qualifications required and the Council of Ministers formed in the previous class with one of the powers, that is the legislative powers. In the legislative powers of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, we had learned that maximum of the bills are introduced in the House by the Cabinet Ministers. They are almost 95%. We had learned that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet is a source of information as they give information to the members in Parliament. And we also had learned the Cabinet is instrumental in the amendment of the Constitution. Any change required to be made in the Constitution must be initiated by the Cabinet. And another legislative power of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, we had learned that the parliamentary houses are summoned and prorogued by the President on the advice of Prime Minister and the Cabinet, while the Lok Sabha can also be dissolved by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. In our next class today, we shall learn about the financial powers of the Cabinet and the Prime Minister. The Finance Minister prepares the budget. The budget of the country for every year is prepared by the Finance Minister. Any amendment required to be done in the budget against the wishes of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet will lead to a vote of no confidence. A vote of no confidence, if moved in the House, is a failure of the ruling party. Hence, it will lead to the fall of the government. The other financial power is the all finances of the government, all money of the government is kept under different funds, while the Cabinet is responsible for the expenditure of the government fund. And we had learned the money bill. The introduction of money bill is done only in the Lok Sabha, and the Lok Sabha is led by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the leader of the Lok Sabha. They are the financial powers of the Prime Minister. Next is the emergency power. Now, emergency power is that the President proclaims or issues emergency only on receiving a written permission from the Cabinet. There is a condition that without receiving a written permission from the Cabinet, the President cannot proclaim emergency. The emergency in the nation, that is national emergency, is written by the Cabinet Ministers and given in written to the President to proclaim it, while the financial emergency also in the order of Cabinet is done. Even any state has to be put under the emergency is on receiving order from the Cabinet is done so. There were the various powers, the legislative, the financial and emergency powers of the Prime Minister. Next comes the position of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the real head of the country, leader of the nation, leader of the Lok Sabha, and all powers of the country in reality is exercised by the Prime Minister. So in number 1, we shall learn all authority of the country is vested on the hands of President, in reality is exercised by the Prime Minister. We call that the President is the administrative head of the country, but real administration is exercised by the Prime Minister. The President summons, prorogues the Parliament and dissolves the Lok Sabha not on his own but on receiving the advice from the Prime Minister. This is a legislative power of the President which he cannot do without getting a permission from the Prime Minister. You may have a question that mention one legislative power of the President that shows he is a nominal head. If you write on the advice of the Prime Minister, the answer comes clear. The President summons or prorogues Parliament or dissolves the Lok Sabha on the advice of the Prime Minister. This part of it shows that he is the nominal head. The Prime Minister advises the President on various appointments. We had learned the appointment of Council of Ministers, judges of Supreme Court and High Court and governors. All those appointments are done by the President, only receiving report from the Prime Minister. The next is, the Prime Minister is a link between the President and the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers, headed by the Cabinet, all top-ranking ministers in the Cabinet decide the policies of the government. While the President usually does not remain present, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet ministers decide. But all that has been decided must be intimated to the President in written by the Prime Minister. So, the Prime Minister is a link between the Council of Ministers and the President. The Prime Minister is also the leader of the Cabinet. All Cabinet ministers are under the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister allocates portfolios. Portfolios are different departments of ministry that are given to different ministers, or in reality is given by the Prime Minister. So he allocates portfolios. The Prime Minister also shuffles or reshuffles the Council of Ministers. A minister of one department may be changed into another department, or a minister's position or portfolio can be withdrawn to give to some other member to become a minister. Is all done under the reshuffling of the Council of Ministers, which is a power of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister also has the power to dismiss a minister. The Prime Minister also coordinates the policies of the government. From one department to another department, coordination is required between the ministers in the cabinet rank and also the work. So this has been done by the Prime Minister. The resignation of the Prime Minister leads to the resignation of all the ministers. If the Prime Minister resigns, all the ministers will have to resign. So this is a few positions of the Prime Minister. We shall learn more of the positions coming up next. The Prime Minister is also the leader of the Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha is the elected representatives body. All members of Lok Sabha, that is 543 members, are elected by the common people. So this is the House of People, and this house is led by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is also the chief spokesperson of the government. Whatever government policies are made, the Prime Minister speaks about them to the people through media, through other ways, and thus he is the spokesperson of the government. Is the defender of the government policies. The Prime Minister must defend the policies if certain minister is unable to answer to the opposition questions. Then the Prime Minister stands as a rescue and defends the policies of the government. Whenever there is a intervention of the opposition, the Prime Minister stands to defend. Yes, next comes intervenes the controversial issues. If during the parliamentary sessions there is a controversy over certain issues, the Prime Minister intervenes and sorts them out. The Prime Minister is the leader of the nation. When he speaks, the whole nation speaks. He speaks for the whole nation. During the crisis, may it be during war or as of now we have the coronavirus pandemic, during those days, the opposition may not like all the policies implemented by the Prime Minister. So they may criticize. But during the crisis, the opposition supports. During the peace hours, the opposition does not support. They always create confusion and criticize the government, even if they plan something good. But during the crisis, during the war, the opposition supports the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister decides the external relationship with the neighboring countries. At the time of the general election, people usually vote for the prime ministerial candidate. For the proposed name of a prime minister and his party, people usually vote. So this is a position shows that what a strong person he is to lead the country or not, people decide. The Prime Minister is the ex officio chairman of the Niti Aayog. The Niti Aayog, that was earlier known as the Planning Commission, is led by the Prime Minister. The President appoints the chairman of the Niti Aayog. The Prime Minister's position is also checked by the people of the country through various ways. To check the authority of the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister must ensure that he receives the support of his party in majority. He usually does not enjoy absolute majority during a coalition government. I had explained what a coalition government is. When two or more parties join together to run the government, then the other party leaders are also to be taken into his side. So it's difficult to run. Then he has to be careful. The Prime Minister, as a leader of the coalition head, must try to solve the problems between the other parties as well. The opposition parties always wait for a chance to criticize the government. So the Prime Minister's power or monotony is checked by the opposition. More often not, the Prime Minister's work is checked by the press and the public opinion. The newspaper, the print media or other electronic media will criticize if the Prime Minister does not go right. So this is how the Prime Minister is checked and his authority is checked. This much for now. The next of the part of the lesson containing the individual responsibility and the collective responsibility we shall have in the next class. Till then, stay happy, keep learning. Bye-bye.